Before the first footprints touched the red heart of Australia, before the deserts stretched beneath a sky untouched by cities, before the continents settled into the shapes we recognize today, there was only silence. Not the silence of emptiness, the silence of waiting. The wind carried grains of ochre across endless plains. Rivers carved their own stories through ancient stone. Giant marsupials wandered forests that no longer exist. The stars above burned with the same brilliance they do tonight, watching a land that seemed isolated from the rest of the world, yet destined to preserve one of humanity's oldest surviving stories. For tens of thousands of years, that story remained hidden beneath layers of myth, not written in books, not carved into monuments, but carried inside living people, inside every cell, inside every chromosome, inside every fragment of DNA, for generations. Many believed Australia's first peoples represented a people frozen in time, a population somehow disconnected from the rest of human history after arriving on an isolated continent. Others claim they were simply another branch of Southeast Asian populations, their uniqueness created only by geography. Still others suggested that because Australia lay so far from Africa, its earliest inhabitants must have arrived surprisingly late in humanity's journey across the globe. Those ideas appeared convincing. Maps seemed to support them. Distance seemed to support them. Even early anthropology appeared to support them. But science has a remarkable habit of dismantling certainty, and nowhere has that happened more dramatically than in the study of Australian Aboriginal DNA. Over the last 2 decades, advances in ancient genomics have transformed our understanding of human history. DNA sequencing technologies that once required years can now reveal entire genomes in days. Hidden within those genomes are records of migrations, population separations, climatic disasters, and ancient encounters that no written history could ever preserve. Australia became one of the greatest puzzles, because every new discovery raised an impossible question. How could a population living on one of Earth's most isolated continents preserve genetic signatures reaching back toward humanity's earliest expansion out of Africa? The answer would challenge assumptions held for generations. That is where the mystery truly begins. The traditional story once taught in textbooks sounded straightforward. Modern humans evolved in Africa roughly 300,000 years ago. Around 60,000 to 70,000 years ago, a relatively small group left Africa, following coastlines through Arabia and South Asia before gradually spreading across Eurasia. Europe was settled, Asia followed. Eventually, much later, humans reached Australia, silceable, logical, comforting. But here is where the story breaks down. Australia was not settled after Europe. It was settled long before the first humans ever entered Ice Age Britain, long before agriculture, long before Stonehenge, long before the pyramids of Egypt, long before writing itself. Archaeological discoveries at sites including Majed Bibi in Arnhem Land have produced evidence indicating human occupation dating back approximately 65,000 years, although exact dates remain the subject of scientific discussion. The excavations, led by researchers including Professor Chris Clarkson and published in Nature in 2017, pushed Australia's human timeline dramatically deeper into the past, 65,000 years. That number changes everything, because at that moment Europe still belonged largely to Neanderthals. Much of northern Asia remained locked beneath advancing ice. Sea levels stood more than 100 meters lower than today. Australia was not Australia. It formed part of the supercontinent known as Sahul, connected to New Guinea and Tasmania by vast land bridges now hidden beneath the ocean. Imagine standing on a shoreline that no longer exists, looking across landscapes now submerged forever. Families carrying children, stone tools wrapped in woven fibers, knowledge passed only through memory, every step carrying humanity farther into unknown territory than ever before. No maps, no roads, no certainty that another horizon even existed. only movement, only survival. For decades, many researchers believed these pioneering populations were repeatedly replaced by later migrations from Asia. It seemed reasonable. After all, almost every other region of Earth experienced wave after wave of migration. Europe witnessed farmers from Anatolia step thence pastoralists. Then countless historical invasions, the Americas experienced repeated demographic shifts, Central Asia became humanity's great crossroads, replacement became the expectation. Australia, surely, would be no different. That assumption survived for years. Then genetics entered the conversation. When researchers began comparing complete genomes from Aboriginal Australians with populations around the world, the results did not match expectations. Instead of revealing extensive recent replacement, the genomes pointed toward extraordinary continuity, deep continuity. Among the deepest ever documented in any living population, that did not mean complete isolation. No human population exists in absolute genetic isolation. Instead, it revealed something far more remarkable. The ancestors of today's Aboriginal Australians separated from the ancestors of many Eurasian populations extremely early after humanity's expansion from Africa, and then maintained a largely independent evolutionary history for tens of thousands of years. Not untouched, not unchanged, but astonishingly continuous. That distinction matters because continuity is not the same as purity. Modern genetics rejects the outdated notion of genetically pure populations. Human history has always involved movement, interaction, and exchange. The remarkable finding is not that Aboriginal Australians remained genetically frozen. It is that their ancestral line extends continuously across an immense span of time, unlike almost any other documented living population. Yet another myth refused to disappear. Many early 20th century anthropologists argued that Aboriginal Australians represented a primitive branch of humanity, somehow less advanced or closer to an earlier stage of evolution. Today, that claim stands completely discredited. Not only morally, scientifically, genomic evidence demonstrates unequivocally that all living humans belong to the same species, Homo sapiens, sharing recent common ancestry. The genetic differences between human populations are remarkably small compared with our overwhelming biological similarity. The uniqueness of Aboriginal Australians does not come from being separate from humanity. It comes from preserving one of humanity's oldest continuous regional histories. That history unfolded across one of Earth's harshest landscapes, deserts expanding, rainforests contracting, sea levels rising, climate oscillating over thousands of years. Every environmental change left subtle fingerprints upon human populations adapting to survive. But survival required more than endurance. It required knowledge. Knowledge of water hidden beneath dry riverbeds. Knowledge of seasonal migrations. Knowledge of medicinal plants. Knowledge encoded not inside DNA, but inside culture. Culture became as essential to survival as biology itself. For thousands upon thousands of years, oral traditions carried information across generations with astonishing precision. Some stories described coastlines now submerged beneath rising seas. Modern geological research suggests parts of these traditions may preserve cultural memories reaching back several thousand years to the end of the last ice age, when melting glaciers caused global sea levels to rise dramatically. The land changed, the stories remembered, science listened, once dismissed as mythology. Some oral histories are now being examined alongside archaeology and geology, revealing unexpected points of convergence. Again and again, Australia challenged assumptions. Again and again, evidence replaced certainty, yet DNA still held deeper secrets. He within every father, he within every mother, he within chromosomes passed silently across countless generations. Researchers soon realized that understanding Australia's past required examining two extraordinary genetic archives, the Y chromosome and mitochondrial DNA, One follows fathers, the other follows mothers. Together, they preserve journeys stretching back tens of thousands of years, journeys no written language ever recorded, journeys no empire ever documented. Journeys surviving only because every generation, unknowingly, carried fragments of those ancient travelers within themselves. Scientists expected complexity. They found it. They expected diversity. They found it. But they also found something else. Ports unlike anywhere else on Earth. Ancient branches that had separated near the dawn of humanity's expansion beyond Africa. Some lineages remained largely confined to Australia and nearby regions for tens of thousands of years. Others hinted at forgotten connections across the ancient landscapes of Sahul. Every discovery answered one question, then created three more. How did these lineages survive such immense spans of time? Why did they remain so distinctive? What happened when rising seas cut Australia off from New Guinea around 8,000 years ago? And perhaps most astonishing of all, what were the fathers of Australia's first peoples carrying in their DNA that scientists never expected to find? The first clues did not emerge from spectacular ruins or royal tombs. They emerged from microscopic strands of DNA that had remained hidden inside living people for thousands of generations. Every father leaves behind more than memories. He leaves behind a Y chromosome. Unlike the rest of the genome, which is reshuffled every generation, most of the Y chromosome passes almost unchanged from father to son. Tiny mutations accumulate slowly over thousands of years, creating a genetic family tree that stretches back toward humanity's earliest ancestors. Each branch is known as a haplogroup, a marker of deep paternal ancestry rather than ethnicity or culture. For years, scientists expected Aboriginal Australian Y chromosomes to resemble those found throughout mainland Southeast Asia. Geography appeared to demand it. Australia lay only a short distance beyond the islands of Indonesia. Surely repeated migrations would have blurred any ancient distinctions. But here is where the story breaks down. The dominant Aboriginal Australian paternal lineage was not a recent Asian arrival. Instead, genetic studies revealed that many Aboriginal Australian men belonged to ancient branches of haplogroup C, particularly CM347, a lineage that diverged very early after modern humans expanded out of Africa. While other branches of haplogroup C are found across parts of Asia and Oceania, CM347 became almost entirely unique to Australia after tens of thousands of years of isolation. That finding carried enormous implications. It suggested that the descendants of some of the earliest people to reach Sahul had maintained paternal continuity across extraordinary spans of time, not uninterrupted, not completely isolated, but remarkably continuous. Other Y chromosome lineages, including K2-derived branches, also contributed to the genetic landscape, reflecting the complex history of the first settlers who entered the ancient continent of Sahul before Australia and New Guinea became separate lands. This was never the story of a single family. It was the story of many small groups, each carrying different paternal lineages, spreading across an entire continent that was larger than modern Europe. Imagine that journey. The coastline they followed no longer exists. The rivers they crossed now lie beneath the sea. Animals unlike any alive today roamed beside them. Giant kangaroos taller than humans, enormous flightless birds, and marsupial predators that have vanished forever. Each generation moved a little farther, not because they knew what lay ahead, because there was always another horizon. Archaeology supports this remarkable expansion. Sites scattered across northern Australia, the Kimberley, Arnhem Land, and the Willandra Lakes demonstrate that humans adapted rapidly to environments ranging from tropical forests to arid deserts. Stone tools, grinding stones, pigments, and hearths reveal sophisticated technological knowledge rather than the simplistic image once imagined by early European observers. The myth of technological stagnation collapses under the evidence. Sophisticated does not always mean metal. Advanced does not always mean cities. Successes should be measured by survival. And by that measure, few societies in human history were more successful than Australia's first peoples. They endured dramatic climate shifts that transformed entire ecosystems. During the last glacial maximum, beginning around 26,000 years ago, temperatures dropped, rainfall declined, and deserts expanded across the continent. Water sources disappeared, vegetation retreated, yet people adapted instead of disappearing. That adaptation left traces in archaeology long before it could ever be detected in DNA. Excavations at Majed Bibi revealed finely crafted stone points, edge-ground axes, grinding stones, and pieces of ochre used for symbolic expression. Similar discoveries across the continent demonstrated that innovation emerged independently within Australia over thousands of years. Culture evolved continuously. Knowledge accumulated. Nothing about this population was frozen in time. Meanwhile, another mystery remained unresolved. If paternal DNA preserved one side of the story, what about the mothers? Unlike the Y chromosome, mitochondrial DNA passes almost exclusively from mother to child. Sons receive it but cannot pass it onward. Daughters become the next link in an unbroken maternal chain, stretching back through countless generations. Those maternal lineages would reveal something equally extraordinary. And in some ways, even more surprising, the fathers preserved one half of the story. The mothers preserved the other. Together they formed a genetic archive unlike any library ever built by human hands. Every mother passes her mitochondrial DNA directly to her children. It changes only through tiny mutations that accumulate over thousands of years, making it one of the most powerful tools for tracing ancient ancestry. When researchers examined Aboriginal Australian mitochondrial DNA, they found something extraordinary. Instead of recent maternal lineages arriving from neighboring regions, many belonged to deeply rooted haplogroups, including M42, S, O, and P lineages that had evolved within Sahul over tens of thousands of years. These maternal branches represented some of the oldest continuous maternal lineages found anywhere on Earth. That discovery changed the conversation. The fathers told the same story, the mothers told the same story. Independent genetic systems, inherited in completely different ways, both pointed toward extraordinary continuity, stretching back to humanity's earliest expansion across southern Asia into the ancient continent of Sahul. But that is not the whole story. Y chromosomes and mitochondrial DNA account for only a tiny fraction of the human genome. The greatest picture comes from autosomal DNA, the 22 pairs of chromosomes inherited from every ancestor. Autosomal DNA is like a mosaic. Every generation adds new pieces while older pieces become smaller, preserving traces of countless ancestors rather than a single maternal or paternal line. Modern genomic studies from institutions including the University of Copenhagen, the University of Adelaide, and the Australian Centre for Ancient DNA revealed that Aboriginal Australians possess a unique autosomal genetic profile. Their ancestry derives primarily from the earliest modern humans who entered Sahul roughly 50,000 to 65,000 years ago. Since then, they experienced long periods of regional isolation while still maintaining cultural and genetic diversity across the continent. Isolation did not create weakness. It created diversity. For thousands of years, hundreds of Aboriginal nations developed across Australia. More than 250 distinct languages were spoken before European colonization. Communities adapted independently to deserts, tropical forests, coastal environments, alpine regions, and vast river systems. Geography encouraged local genetic differences while preserving the deep ancestry shared across the continent. The Australian desert became more than a landscape. It became a genetic barrier. Mountain ranges slowed movement. Expanding deserts separated communities. Rising seas transformed entire coastlines. Around 8,000 years ago, the melting of Ice Age glaciers flooded the land bridge connecting Australia and New Guinea. Families that once walked between connected lands suddenly found oceans where valleys had once existed. The separation lasted millennia. Each generation carried forward the same ancient genetic heritage while slowly developing regional differences shaped by environment, climate, and culture. Scientists also searched for genes linked to physical adaptations. Popular myths often claimed that dark skin automatically meant close genetic relationships with African populations. The evidence showed something far more fascinating. Skin color can evolve independently under similar environmental pressures. Aboriginal Australians and Africans share the same human origins, but their dark pigmentation largely reflects parallel adaptation to high ultraviolet radiation rather than recent shared ancestry. Several genes involved in pigmentation, including variants affecting melanin production, evolved under natural selection in different populations living under intense sunlight. Similar appearance, different evolutionary histories. Another myth dismantled: hair texture, facial features, and body proportions also reflect combinations of many genes shaped by local adaptation rather than simplistic racial categories invented centuries ago. Researchers have also explored genes associated with metabolism, immune function, and environmental adaptation. Living across one of Earth's most challenging continents required remarkable resilience. While scientists continue investigating these adaptations, the evidence suggests that thousands of years of life in diverse Australian environments influenced natural selection in ways still being understood today. Yet perhaps the greatest force shaping Aboriginal genetics was not biology. It was history. For more than 60,000 years, communities maintained rich cultural traditions, trade networks, ceremonial exchanges, and sophisticated systems of ecological knowledge. Then, within only a few generations after British colonization began in 1788, disease, violence, displacement, and forced removals devastated many communities. Entire populations collapsed, languages disappeared, family lines were broken. Some Y chromosome lineages declined dramatically because so many men were killed during frontier conflicts. European paternal lineages entered some Aboriginal populations through colonial-era admixture, while maternal Aboriginal lineages often remained, reflecting the different social realities of colonization. DNA preserves even painful history. It records survival as faithfully as it records tragedy. Modern genomic studies therefore distinguish between ancient ancestry and recent admixture. Despite the profound disruptions of the last 2 centuries, the deep genetic foundations of Aboriginal Australians remain clearly identifiable, connecting living people to ancestors who first entered Sahul tens of thousands of years ago. This is why many scientists describe Aboriginal Australians as representing one of the oldest continuous living cultures on Earth, not because nothing changed, everything changed. Sea levels rose. Climates shifted, animals vanished, languages evolved, cultures transformed, but communities remained generation after generation, century after century, millennium after millennium. The myths that once portrayed Aboriginal Australians as isolated relics of the past have collapsed under the weight of archaeology, linguistics, and genomics. They were never frozen in time. They were innovators, navigators, artists, astronomers, land managers, and survivors whose knowledge adapted continuously to an ever-changing continent. Today, advanced genome sequencing continues refining this remarkable story. Every new discovery strengthens the same conclusion. The ancestors of today's Aboriginal Australians were among the earliest modern humans to expand beyond Africa, reaching Sahul far earlier than once imagined. Their descendants maintained an extraordinary genetic continuity while developing one of humanity's richest cultural traditions. This discovery changes more than science, it changes perspective. When an Aboriginal elder looks across the red deserts of central Australia, along the cliffs of Arnhem Land, or toward the waves breaking against ancient coastlines, that connection is not simply cultural. It is biological, it is archaeological, it is historical, it is written into every generation that came before. The story hidden inside their DNA is not a story of isolation from humanity. It is a story of humanity itself, a story that began in Africa hundreds of thousands of years ago, crossed unknown shores during the Ice Age, survived changing climates, rising oceans, and unimaginable hardships, and continues to live today in one of the world's oldest continuous living populations, because DNA does not remember kingdoms. It does not remember borders. It does not remember empires. It remembers people. And in the DNA of Australia's first peoples, humanity has preserved one of its oldest surviving memories, a living bridge between our distant ancestors and the generations still walking the same ancient land today.